Afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the third and final webinar in this lunchtime series on working from home and remote working. In our first two webinars, we presented important research findings on this topic, and then we had a discussion with three business leaders in the human resources field. Recordings of both webinars are available on the MBB YouTube and Facebook pages, especially for those who could not attend the sessions. This time round, we will focus on the policy regulating working from home in Malta. And in this regard, I welcome with us today Ms. Kirsten Miller, researcher at the Malta Council for Economic and Social Development, Ms. Fabian, chair of the Malta Chamber's HR and Talent Thematic Committee, and Ms. Diane Muscat, Director General at the Department for Industrial and Employment Relations. As usual, if you have any questions or comments which you'd like them to address, please type these out in the chat and I will read them out. However, before kickstarting today's panel discussion, I would like to quickly run through the main recommendations which emerged from the MBB study to serve as a sort of quick reminder for all of us on what the study proposed. And in this respect, I have prepared two brief slides which I will show to you now. You should be able to see my screen now. So, as part of the MBB study, which we had conducted together with Dr. Marie Bricuglio, we had proposed a number of intervention measures and recommendations to enhance the success of working from home and remote working, especially in the long term. These measures were directed both to government and also to businesses themselves, depending on the level of intervention that was needed. Obviously, something which we have discussed at great length in this webinar series was the issue of employee isolation and the degradation in relationships which resulted from not being at the office. And under this heading, we propose several things, such as focusing on the upgrading of soft skills for our employees. And in terms of soft skills, we're focusing on mainly things such as communication between colleagues, self-management, self-motivation, managing your own time, and these sort of intangible skills. We also proposed the potential of virtual social time, especially given that at the time the study was published, having everyone at the office was not that possible. So you could still have a situation where people, and especially colleagues, were meeting at least virtually in order to catch up. Something that has potential in the long term was repurposing office space. So obviously you had a situation where if pre-COVID you had an office with 50 people and this business decided to take up remote working in the long term, and you now have a situation where there are only, for example, 25 people at the office at any given time, and the other 25 are working from home or from somewhere else, you have a lot of free office space. So obviously, you can then rethink what you're going to do with this office space, either downsizing the office in order to save on costs, or maybe renting that part out, or maybe also something which some businesses are starting to do, repurposing that space to provide space for recreational activities and even socializing space for employees when they are at the office. And also we propose the idea of workplace hubs, which came out directly from a finding that around a quarter of our respondents, which were of higher than average when it comes to income, did not have a private space to work at home. And such publicly available workplace hubs in several localities would provide such an opportunity for people to work somewhere else rather than the office, especially if they have to travel long distances to get to the office. And it could also promote incentives for alternative modes of transport, which would then have an environmental benefit also. Another issue which many of our respondents mentioned was productivity. So many businesses felt that they were unable to measure the productivity of their employees when they were not actually at the office, especially if sort of the relationship or the flow of communication between the supervisor and their employees started weakening. And something which the study calls for, and also many businesses themselves called for, were new systems to measure productivity, which included both an aspect of goal setting and then tracking those tasks, but but focusing performance based on the results achieved, not necessarily on the amount of time that is spent working. Also tying into the previous point, many businesses and also the study itself called for the embracing of technology, such as through the use of online learning platforms and remote help desks. I think this is particularly important because obviously we want to embrace the future of work, but we also have to recognize that there are different levels of digital literacy. And we do not want a situation where certain employees are left behind just because they are not as digitally literate as others. So remote help desks and making sure that all employees are actually able to work efficiently from outside the office if they want to, are paramount. Something else that is also very important are cloud-based filing systems or VPN networks to connect to servers to access files, which some may think is the norm nowadays, but actually some of our respondents actually replied that they cannot work from home because they do not have such a system in place. So they cannot actually access the files that they need. Then we also have the environmental perspective. We found that reducing private car trips and the emission reductions that go along with that is the main environmental benefit that would come from working from home. However, interestingly enough, we still found that those people who are working from home were still visiting the office plenty of times during that week, which obviously we have to see why were people still visiting the office if they were meant to be working from home. And we have to rationalize work visits in order to actually reap the full benefits, the full environmental benefits that comes from this. And then obviously something which I know that the Energy and Water Agency in Malta is already working on. We have to improve the audits and the efficiency when it comes to water and energy consumption at both the home and office blocks, because there's a nuance issue. You can't really say that the home is more efficient than the office or the office is more efficient than the home, because it really depends on the building and how old the infrastructure is and how efficient it is. Then we have investment in solutions for comfortable, private and occupationally safe workplaces at home. And this ties in to my previous point that 25% do not have access to a private space to work from at home. And we found that also around 15% do not have adequate chairs or desks to work from, which obviously would then include health and safety issues. And finally, many businesses called for linking all the above measures to the post-COVID recovery effort. So if there are any expenses which businesses have to undertake, they would like that the government actually supports them by including such expenses in upcoming schemes. That's a very quick overview from my end because time is rather short. On the recommendations in our study. If you have any questions, please type them out in the chat and I will get to them later on in this webinar. But now I'd like to move quickly on to our panelists today. Welcome again, Diane, Kirsten, and Fabian. Thank you very much for joining us. What I'd like to start off with is I'd like to ask all of you to briefly introduce yourself and also your roles within your respective organizations. Maybe we can start off with Kirsten.
Hi, good afternoon, Gabriel, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss this important topic. I am an economist by background, and I have worked on this area with MCSD and with social partners, also representing government on this specific working group, which dealt with working from home, but also extended to remote working and also beyond that to new forms of work. So we took it to a very wider topic. So my interest here is today very much tied to the topic of the day, policy, and creating the right policy framework so that employers and employees can feel comfortable operating and it's mutually beneficial to all parties.
Perfect. Thank you, Kirsten. Fabian, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this invitation, Gabriel, and being part of this panel. I'm Fabian. Here in this webinar, I am representing the Chamber of Commerce. I am the chairperson of a committee that is focused on talent and HR at the Chamber. I also, of course, work at RSM Malta. I'm a management consultant there because my background is business management. I have this topic at heart, both because in our organization, I'm the strategic HR lead. So I've felt it firsthand, of course, what it means to manage an organization close to 200 people during the pandemic and also currently, because there are new repercussions that we have to manage. And as well, of course, within the chamber and in my role working with clients, appreciating the different realities in the different sectors. So how we have all had to put into place different measures to be able to continue delivering value to our customers, collaborating with suppliers and partners, and of course, ensure a healthy and safe environment, wherever that is nowadays, for our workforce.
Thank you very much, Fabian. Diane, you're up next.
Hello, good afternoon to all. I'm Diane. I'm the Director General of the Department for Industrial and Employment Relations. And our work, we are basically the regulator of employment conditions. Such a big word, but in reality, we do assist thousands, both employers and employees on a daily basis. Because our aim is first and foremost to try and help employers to put in good practices with regards to employment conditions. And especially in this regard, even how to transition from a telework regime to a more flexible remote policy, not only through the legislation, but in reality. How is it done in reality? Because usually I see a huge difference between what is written and what actually can be done, and how at the end of the day, it ends up as a win-win situation, both for the employers and employees.
Perfect. Thank you all for your introductions. We can kickstart the panel discussion with Kirsten. You said that you've worked on this topic for a number of years, and also you're working with the MCSD on this topic. So could you please provide us with a brief overview of the current policy environment which regulates working from home in Malta, and is it regulated in any way, actually?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and in fact, it is regulated, contrary to some beliefs. Currently, there is the subsidiary legislation 452.104, which is the Telework National Standards Order, and this already had telework already gives us an indication that it might be a bit further away from what from the scenarios which we're discussing and we're living by today. However, it is very similar in concept to all the emotions and all the feelings which social partners continuously mention in the need for understanding this topic closer. So it is regulated. It states that any employer needs to consider teleworking for employees if this is of mutual benefit, and in so doing, an agreement has to be put in place for this to be effective. Any such agreement has to be done either at employment stage or the employment contract, and here we have both Diane and both Fabian, who are HR experts, who will most probably have much more information than me on this. But yes, it needs to be dealt with at that stage. And yes, it already outlines the basic fundamentals of working from home, as we want to discuss it today. That is the niche we want to focus on today. And I continue saying this because I think we need to start a discussion as to the wider areas of working from home, remote working, teleworking. I think we need to see this within this whole wider environment.
Thank you, Kirsten. So if I understood you correctly, right now it's focusing mainly on working from home, so telework, not remote working more generally.
Exactly.
Exactly, all right, thank you. Fabian, as the chair of the Chamber's HR and Talent Committee, could you share some of the committee's sentiment on the prospect of introducing remote working in the long term? And is this even being considered as a real possibility?
I think our sentiment is that this reality that our companies need to operate in now is so much more complex. What we are talking about is activities that have impacted so many aspects of managing a workforce, whether it is the corporate culture and ensuring that our organizations are still, we can still deliver that corporate value, that corporate feel through wherever our employees are working. So whether it's from their living room, whether it is from their study. It has also brought a lot of change to performance management. So performance management was already very difficult to ensure that it is fair, it is consistent. So now it's even more. In fact, it came out in your recommendations and in your analysis, Gabriel. So how do I measure performance when I can't see my employees? So it is challenging the traditional mindset of managing employees. So managing from a distance, putting a lot more trust, managing through goal setting, and managing through outcomes and outputs. But that is a very different mindset. That means that a lot of planning and a lot of communication needs to be put into place. So even our leadership styles are being challenged, and we have top leaders and middle management leaders and team leaders that need to continue developing and identify new ways of leading. So communication is not just the face-to-face communication, but we need to bring different settings of managing teams, managing individuals, managing poor performance, managing great performance, right? So the sentiment that we have is that this is not it's not just click of a button, install a system, deliver some training, and hooray, here we go, we're all, live and kicking and giving our best remotely. That we definitely need to put together a well-thought program and framework within our companies. A framework that looks at the different aspects, the different components, okay, of what that means, starting from the corporate culture, right down to ensuring that communication is flowing, both corporate communication, okay, so the messaging, the informal communication that typically happens when you are at the office, those corridor conversations, how do you transmit and how do you keep those live through remote working arrangements? So I must say that our sentiment is that many more companies need a lot more assistance, in all honesty, on how to bring these realities to life. As Diane said, there is a huge difference between the theoretical and what could be done on paper and what needs to happen on the ground. And reiterating and recommunicating very often, because again, the fact that we're not physically close, and us Mediterraneans, we love the ability to be tactile, right? And to be able to talk to each other and, and give that tap on the back. So how do we do that from our virtual workplaces? I mean, I could go on and on and on, so I'm stopping.
Yes, it's excellent point, Fabian. Actually, I have a follow-up question on something that you have already touched upon when it comes to performance. Some, especially business owners and senior managers, have been concerned about the impact that working from home could have on employee development and
Yes.
also potential promotion prospects.
Yes.
Are you also considering this as a challenge when it comes to deciding whether deciding upon the sort of performance review of an employee?
Yes, the reason why I said it's very complex, because as even before the pandemic, performance management was already a thorny subject. You can get it really wrong, you can get it average, and very few get it really right. So now add in all these complexities where we need to define what success and great performance looks like, even from, remote delivery. We need to train and help the performance managers understand what the newness looks like and how it can affect. And then we also have to help the employees themselves to show more, display more, how accountable they feel and how much they own their own deliverables, their own career, their own actions. So rather than pinpoint, that this has become now even more complex to give promotions, I would say the promotions and the salary increases and the bonuses and all the variable incentives, they are just parts of the whole framework. We can't just look at that. We need to look, first of all, at how do we ensure that there is mutual trust. Trust from the employee that I can work flexibly, I can deliver, and I can continue giving my utmost to the organization. And trust from the employer that irrespective the time and the place and how my employee is delivering, I have trust in the capabilities that they will continue giving their best. So it's not just on the promotions, I would say, Gabriel.
Yes, and obviously you can also add that there are certain skills which management would need, such as soft skills, which are not developed when you are working from home and just looking at a screen. So we could also have to look at that impact.
Definitely. The digital etiquette in itself has grown so much over the past year and a half, right? There are courses, there are books to read, because whether you are a manager, whether you are a business developer or the salesperson, and you still need to continue operating and reaching your targets through digital means, it automatically means that your previous way of working and communicating and talking needs to adapt itself.
Exactly. Thank you, Fabian. Kirsten, before we move on to Diane's intervention, who will update us on sort of the current policy developments and discussions going on in this field. I think you already mentioned something, but so not remote working from home policies within a business have to be actually formalized in some sort of agreement. In a sense, they should not be ad hoc or just by word of mouth. Maybe you can sort of add something else to that.
Exactly. The law stipulates that an agreement has to be in place between the employer and the employee. If it is done at employment stage, that agreement is in force. So the worker knows the conditions which are being set. If then the working from home comes about as a result of agreement of the arrangements which and the circumstances which arise throughout the years, then still an agreement has to be in place. However, both parties have to agree. So there are several conditions which have to be met, and the law stipulates also what goes into those agreements. So interestingly, the law already covers areas such as isolation, which was mentioned earlier, areas of monitoring, But it also delves into issues such as privacy. So we're tackling GDPR issues here, which is a concern for several parties. Obviously, yes, remuneration and training. But I think any legislation or any legislative tool which is used to implement or to assist the use of such opportunities, such as working from home, need to provide need to be based on, yes, trust, which also Fabian mentioned, but need to provide equity between parties. So that is the fundamental key role which policy has to see to. It needs to facilitate the opportunity which is being seen. So government needs to make sure that, yes, I think this policy, this incentive provides the right way forward for the economy to grow. So incentivizing in a certain way the grasping of such opportunities, and removing any possible abuse or any possible challenges, and reducing those to an extent. So this is the way forward, which social partners and at an CSD level were discussed. So the mention of flexibility, making sure that this is used and it's mutually convenient to both parties, using it appropriately, and yet improving managerial and improving managerial skills and improving performance management. All these were the 5 key areas which were delved upon. So I think we already have a very strong foundation, which can be fine-tuned to make sure that all of these opportunities are being reaped.
Yes, and your points, I think, are even more important in the current situation, where sort of many businesses panicked and asked their employees to work from home as soon as possible, perhaps without such agreements already in place. Some may not be aware that there actually needs to be these types of agreements. So thank you, Kirsten. Diane, I'm going to move on to you. The pandemic has pushed the issue of remote working onto the business agenda more than ever before. We're seeing, for example, this webinar, the several webinars by other organizations, the study which we have just published. From a government perspective, are we seeing new discussions on this front, and can we expect updated policies in the future?
Yes, I think so. First and foremost, because let us put it that way, what is the main difference between telework and remote working? And from my experience, the main difference is going back to the origins. Telework, what was initially invented or implemented as a result of family-friendly measures, where an employee was supposed to work in a specific location and not to move from that specific location. In fact, we have many employees who actually transfer, for example, the office calls to their home. Remote working was accelerated rather so by the COVID for health and safety reasons. Let me give you just 2 examples which I encountered during this last month with 2 different employers, so that we give even a practical element to all this. I had the pleasure of meeting a local company, which employs more than 30 employees. But this company does not have an actual office space. The owner actually uses 2 rooms from his home, which he converted to office. And so he employed all the employees on condition that they have a suitable space that they can work, so a quiet space where they can work from home. He provided all amenities, and he made sure that his employees were even working comfortable. So our advice in that particular scenario was actually that since this is a basic condition of employment, and it even ties now with the transparent and predictable working conditions, which at the moment all of the member states are transposing another directive, listen, be already in line and included as part of the contract of employment. as we all say, patti chiari amicizia lunga. They know that it is a working basing condition. They cannot, as you rightly said, tomorrow come up to the employer and tell him, listen, I don't have a space where to work from. No, because that was a condition of employment. The second case, which I encountered, is different. The company is quite a large company in Malta, and it has a lot of offices in which they operate, but they gave the opportunity to the admin staff, nearly all the admin staff, to work from home. The situation in this case that they had a very good information system, so they could do it technologically wise speaking. After now that the pandemic and the associated restrictions have been eased a little bit, some of the employees asked the company to extend this remote working policy, and based on the premise that they worked, the performance was met still the same, and they could better juggle the work-life balance, the work-life balance needs. The employer came to us and said, how should I approach this? So of course, I pointed to the agreement. Yes, but what are you going to include in the agreement? First of all, you have to make sure that the company, the employer, assesses both the job suitability and the employee suitability. So in this case, the performance, it's not only performance related to the future, but also your past performance. If you are a reliable employee and you have proven to be reliable, even, for example, during hard times, during the pandemic, etc., it's different. That one that maybe didn't give that extra effort or didn't go that extra mile. And in this case, the employer told me, how am I going to make sure that certain times of year, not necessarily in a particular pattern, but certain times of year, the employees are actually present at work because of audits that they have and because of other quality mechanisms that they need actually the employees to be present. So my advice to them was, first and foremost, include it in the agreement as a proviso. So I'm giving you this telework, but on condition that. And then now this is the interesting part of the law. When actual communication mechanisms come to practice, then there has to be a good line of communication between the employees and their next superior, so that the superior have the responsibility to call in the employees when needed, especially during these audits and in the case of this company. Because most probably the owner that spoke to me wouldn't be able to know exactly who is on present, and he doesn't need to know actually. If he has a good management structure and has good communication, but also transposed in an agreement so that everyone knows what is expected from him, this could work. Obviously, we did not mention it here, but it's implied that, again, all amenities have to be provided by the employer. Now, whether we're speaking about communication allowance or health and safety allowance, which covers an ergonomic chair, what have you, but it has to be provided. So that's even in the current legislation. So that's the difference between what we're speaking, what we have to look at even in future law, is to adopt a hybrid model. A hybrid model is one which encompasses the good practices which we can take from the telework policy, with telework legal notice, which now is more than 10 years old, in fact, and the new practices which we can adopt from current work practices. So that is definitely something to look forward to, and something very interesting to see exactly how it will work.
Thank you very much, Diane, for that excellent overview. And yes, as you said, everything goes back to having a formal agreement between the employee and the employer, because then both will know where they stand, and in essence, no issue should arise, in inverted commas, because you know what you signed up for, in a sense.
And we still arise this issue.
Yes.
But at least, we should go about it with an open mind, yes. And at least with a sense that listen, I need to have my job, so I need to give it still my all, and the employer should come even halfway, where we have to find. But it's not difficult. I mean, many companies have found compromises. Of course, there are those industries which are not possible. I mean,
Of course.
traditional, which still employ thousands of employees in Malta, the manufacturing, of course, it's not possible for them to work remotely.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, from your own personal perspective, there isn't too much of a difference when it comes to working from home or working remotely. Is that correct?
There is a difference because as I said, the traditional way, for example, did not encompass for information technology to be present. Let me give you an example. In my department, I started operating 2 free phones, one for employers, one for employees. Everything is managed online. I don't have people actually at the time all at one go at the office. Actually, we don't have space to do it. So I don't even use the traditional telephones. Even nowadays, cases are recorded through an information system. So that was not encompassed in the telework, the traditional telework agreement. Always stipulated the time which you are going to start and the time which you are going to finish. The concept of remote working lies about the core hours of the offices. So a business can have a particular core hour in which it requires all employees to be present. In other cases, it might not have. So that's very important. But apart from that, remote working has also to encompass then the contact hours. Why? Because what are the contact hours where an employee can be actually contacted? Does the employee has the right to disconnect? Always vis-a-vis in line with the Organization of Working Time Directive, which stipulates the hours of rest that an employee can have. So that's why it's different from the traditional telework.
Thank you, Diane. Fabian, back to you. Many of our survey respondents argue that working from home would be made easier if government support is tied to the post-COVID recovery efforts, which I also mentioned in my brief presentation. Do you or does your committee agree with this? And are there any specific incentives which come to mind or were mentioned in the committee discussions?
Yes, Gabriel, if sort of everyone had to listen intently to what we are all saying here today, all the panelists, we have been referring to infrastructure, systems, competence, and new practices. Now, if we think that our businesses can invest in all of these 4 areas, all in parallel, so all in unison, so they need to, you can't have one but not the other, because the recipe will not come out just right. So our businesses have gone through 2020 where most of the sectors were not doing well. So the injection of support needs also to cover these aspects. Now, not all incentives are designed in a manner that can help the businesses invest in these. So yes, definitely, I would suggest that there is a constant communication between the business community and government to be able to extend and design financial support around these 4 perspectives, and not just one type of investment. Right? So digitalization needs to be accompanied with a new way of working. You find new ways of working by upskilling and changing people's mindset and ways of operation. So it can't just be support for the device or for the infrastructure. Also, the infrastructure, very often we're now, as a business community, we're consuming it as we go. So new ways of investing in infrastructure, software, hardware, right, and systems need to be recognized by the incentives. So what I'm saying essentially is that the incentives need to be current and future-oriented, rather than traditional or reflective of a different way of operating that the pandemic has overhauled. Okay, and also support needs to be provided to businesses to plan this. Earlier on, we were saying this needs to be a coherent framework. You can't just look at one component and not the rest. So establishing this framework is also a process in itself. You just don't wake up in the morning and very quickly write up a policy. This is not just about a policy. within the organization. I mean, this is changing the way we have been operating and fine-tuning it, because I recognize the fact that we have been a year and a half going through this, so there are lessons to be learned and improvements to be done. So yes, definitely, incentives need to be there, and they need to be cognizant of the fact that the matter is complex and that there are different components of investment that would need to be catered for.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fabian, for the excellent points. And thank you all. Thank you, Diane, Kirsten, and Fabian. Unless you have any other points, which many of you have any other points which you'd like to mention, we're bringing the webinar to a close. So no more points. Perfect. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to all the participants for joining us this afternoon and for joining us over these 3 weeks in this webinar series. As with the other webinars, this session will be recorded and we'll promote it on our YouTube and Facebook pages. And we'll also share the link with you after to share with your network. Thank you all, and I wish you all a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.